I'm Dan Schmitt. I do a motorcycle racing TV show, Team Chicago Challenge. I've been doing that TV show for 38 years now. I've been racing motorcycles for 53 years. Crazy Art, one of my old friends. I met Art when we were doing the radio show, Open Road Radio, and he was the #1 caller. That's why we call him Crazy Art. So we're going back 1999, I think it's when 98, 99 we started a TV show with Gina Woods. So I want to thank the members of the club for inviting me. And you may wonder, what does a motorcycle racer have interest in Avantis? Well, here, I'll pass this out first. The first car I ever drove, and I was 14 years old, my dad had a 54 Studebaker Champion Commander Starliner. But we didn't have a V8, it was only a 6-cylinder with 3-ended tree. I was 14 and he let me drive it at the Bonneville Woods. So Studebaker has been part of my life going back when I was 14, but also I should point out, when all the records were being set at Bonneville, I was probably in 8th grade and I was aware of the Avanti. I was aware of what was going on, the land speed record. But, you know, I was only in 8th grade, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but I was aware of it. I knew about my brother Mike. I remember talking about it. And then my brother and my cousin both went to Notre Dame. So when we would drive to visit them, I still remember driving on 2 and going past proving grounds. Because my dad never took the tollway. My dad used to say, you take the tollway, I'll take the highway, and I'll save 25 cents. So that's my involvement with Studebaker, Avanti. I've been aware of Avanti going all the way back, and now that I'm looking deeper into, you know, the Granatellis, the records, if you own an Avanti, you are the end result of many, many years of performance from Studebaker. So Studebaker is always known, you know, past this how you can see the first car I drove. Studebaker always was known as a high-performance car. Even my dad, who was a big reader, he was not a racer, but he was a real car guy, and so he would know all about Studebakers, and he would always say that the performance car. You know, and if you look back, and I'm going to show you a picture of a couple of Studebakers. This one here is the Big 6. This had a 352 cubic inch straight 6 engine starting in 1918. Well, Model T's only had a 4-cylinder engine. I mean, this was a real performance car. The police department bought these cars. They had the long suspension. It was a 117 inch wheelbase. And this one here, it was at the museum. I've been to the Studebaker Museum. Went 475,000 miles, and they were still touring around the country with this. So Studebaker has always been known as a performance automobile. But then Studebaker also, if everybody knows, it was a wagon company, and it was the largest wagon company in the entire country. And it was always about performance. If you look into old Studebaker writing about just the hubs, because back then wagons did not have ball bearings. I mean, I think of what kind of grease and what kind of lard, what kind of grease that they could use, and how often. I should be looking, how often did you have to grease your wheels in a wagon? And when they were crossing the country in covered wagons. In fact, when I was at Pioneer Village in the middle of Nebraska, they got a Studebaker cargo wagon, and just one company bought 5,000 cargo wagons from Studebaker and 15,000 oxen. So this is you know, when you look at the whole Studebaker's deal, and also in the turn of the century when they first made their first automobile, there was a debate with Studebaker between electric and gas-powered automobiles. And just like now, and I think the electric car is going to fail because I think it's as silly as anything you could, because all electric cars depend on something being burned, something creating energy somewhere. So you're better off just having your automobile create the energy and take you where you want to go. So anyhow, that's a little bit about my racing. Oh, and talk about Bonneville, because I'm going to talk about motorcycle race. When I raced at Willow Springs, a 24-hour motorcycle race, I drove across and went by, I've been by the Salt Flats probably 10, 12 times over my life. Well, one year I brought my dirt bike with. So I took my dirt bike off and I rode on the Salt Flats. And just like they ran big ovals up to 10-mile tracks, you know, when they did other records, I got to run my motorcycle in huge circles. It was just like being on ice. So I have a feeling of what racing on Bonneville is all about. So anyway, we talk about these high-performance Studebakers. Another one I'm going to show you. This is Ab Jenkins, who was one of the Mormon meteors, they called them. And he went cross-country in a 1927 Commander from New York to San Francisco in 77 hours and 40 minutes. He set all the records at that time in 1927. So this is another vehicle that's in the museum that shows that Studebaker was always involved with performance. So it isn't like they just happen to be a performance company. So if you own an Avanti, like I said, you are benefiting from Studebaker and their performance background or the performance blood in them. Another car we're going to talk about, and this is very interesting, it's another 1927 Commander, and a AAA ran an endurance and speed test in Atlantic City, New Jersey. This car here, it's in the museum, it went 25,000 miles in 23,000 minutes. So it took 16 days that this went on, and all the time was counted when they were changing drivers and fueling and all that. It was all counted as a minutes. And this car in 1927 ran an average speed of 65 miles per hour. So think back, Ford was still running their Model A Ford, and it was still a 4-cylinder engine. So Studebaker with the Big Six was really a high-performance automobile, and Studebaker really promoted that. And now we're to get into, in 1927 also, which I mentioned, I went by the test ground. So if you're driving to South Bend, don't take the tollway. Take the back roads, but take two. You'll go by, it's now a county park, but their original test grounds are right there, just west of the highway at maybe about 5 miles west of South Bend. And some of the factory buildings are still there. I mean, I still remember seeing the 6-story factory buildings that were 3, 4, 5 blocks long. That's how big of the buildings that Studebaker was using. But then they got involved, in 1930, the Indy 500 changed the rules. Prior to that, the cars could only run a 91.5 cubic inch engine. So in order to get manufacturers, automobile manufacturers involved with the race, they raised the limit to 366 cubic inch. So I got a couple pictures here. One of the cars that competed in 1931, 32, and 33. You might have read about this car. But this car also in after running Indy in May, and this car crashed in that race. They took it back to the factory, rebuilt it, and at Pikes Peak, this car here set the new record. They ran the Pikes Peak Hillclimb with the 336 cubic inch L-head inline engine. 17 minutes and 40 seconds is what they did the hill climb at Pikes Peak. And if you've ever seen a hill climb, Pikes Peak, it's all dirt and it's all very dangerous. And then also, they ran Indy. He had a 6-member team, where he had 5 cars, 6 members, and they ran in 1932, and in the 32 race, the best finish was 3rd place by Cliff Berger. Zach Myers finished in the 37 car, finished in 6th place. In 1933, they were a little more cautious because Indy at that time was the brickyard. So they were running on cobblestones, basically. So in 1933, Tony Galata finished 7th, Zach Meyer finished 9th, Luther Johnson finished 10th, Cliff Berger finished 11th, and L.L. Korn finished 12th. So Studebaker did very well at the Indy 500 and using basically a production-based car. It was a 336 cubic inch straight 8 engine, 4 Studebaker downdraft carburetors, made 205 horsepower at 4,200 RPM. It had a 3-speed manual gearbox and 4-wheel mechanical brakes. And that car was just restored, and I think the Studebaker Museum has now got it, I believe. What happened? World War II came along. So Studebaker made trucks. Studebaker made the Weasel, which was a personnel carrier. And Studebaker also made the Curtiss-Wright 9-cylinder radial engine for the B-17 under license with Curtiss-Wright. There was a B-17 up in Michigan, and I talk to these guys at the EAA every year, and that B-17 has Studebaker engines. And they're just probably 150 miles from South Bend. So it's a come around, go around. So now we're going to jump into the 1950s. And this is a very interesting story. I'm going to show you these cars. The Golden Hawks. In '56, you could have bought a Golden Hawk with 352 cubic inch Packard motor. So in that '56 Golden Hawk, and there's a picture of the Golden Hawk from '56 and '57. And let me make a little change of what I'm going to talk about, because I owned a '57 Chevy with the fins. Now I look at the Golden Hawk with the fins. In reality, I think that '56 Hawk looks so much better without the fins. And with the Packard motor, it was probably the first muscle car available. And we're talking 1956. And so one magazine did a test. In their test, the 1956 with the Packard motor was faster than the Chevy Corvette, faster than the Ford Thunderbird in the quarter mile and in the 0 to 60. And it was faster than the Chrysler 300B with the Hemi engine. Only the Chrysler could match the Studebaker in top speed, and top speed for these cars was like 125 miles per hour. Then in 1957, they supercharged the 289 Studebaker engine, and again, the 1957 Golden Hawk was faster than the Corvette, faster than the Thunderbird, and faster than the Chrysler 300 with the Hemi engine, which was basically a NASCAR vehicle. So that's something that Studebaker and Avanti owners should, I mean, this is part of your background, and it all comes together. And now we're going to talk about the Avantis. So the Avantis, there was a new CEO at Studebaker, Sherwood Hedberg, and Studebaker was losing money. Studebaker was having problems of getting into the 60s. So he came up with a brilliant idea of building a new car, something that would really bring people back into the showroom. So who did he call? Who did he get a hold of? He got together with Raymond Lowry. And I should mention about Lowry Design. He's also the designer of the 1953-54 Studebakers, which at that time was the most modern looking car in America. When you look at a 53 Ford, 53 Cadillac, 53 anything, they really look old and stodgy compared to that 53, 54 Studebaker. So anyhow, so we got Lowry together and he put a team together. In 40 days, they came up with this design of building an Avanti. And not only, it was a 40-day crash program, but also at the same time, you got Andy Granatelli, who is now the owner of Paxton Supercharging, and he gets involved with Studebaker. Studebaker brings him in, he becomes part of the racing development, and that's where they came up with the engines for the Avanti. You have the R1 engine, which is just carbureted. The R2 is supercharged, 289. The R3 has got higher lift cams and supercharging, and I think that might be the 308.
304 and a half.
304, okay. And then the R4, which they didn't sell many, but they did take them to Bonneville. The R4 was a dual quads on the 304 engine with the high performance cams. So then I'm going to talk now a little bit about Andy Granatelli. And we should all be well aware who Andy Granatelli was and his brothers. They were Chicago boys. They got into automotive. First, Joe was the oldest brother. He became a mechanic. And then they opened up, eventually they had a gas station down by Montrose and Broadway. And they got robbed there, so they moved there and had a speed shop. And I'm not going to dispute, but I'm seeing the addresses on Broadway by Foster. And in their speed shop, and I got pictures of their speed shop. And the Granatelli started racing the Indianapolis 500 in 1946. So they ran from 1946 to 1954 with the Grand Corps cars out of their speed shop. And the best finish was second place with Jim Rathman doing the driving for them. And then I got a picture of the speed shop. You got Joe is the older brother, Andy was the middle brother, and Vince was the younger brother. So here's a picture in the speed shop and the car they were racing at Indy. So his background, Andy Granatelli's background, is they were selling speed. That was their whole thing, was how to sell speed. And they were building engines. And I mean, just think back, going to race the Indy 500 out of your little speed shop. What kind of expense, what kind of cost? And Andy Granatelli went on and became Mr. Indy 500. There's another thing about Andy Granatelli is that he promoted the stock car racing. How many people remember hearing about stock car racing at Soldier Field? So he created the Hurricane Hot Rod Racing Association, and he promoted racing at Soldier Field. And they even had a NASCAR National at Soldier Field. So we're talking about things that most people never even knew of unless you were really a gearhead back then. In fact, a couple of my friends, Ray Drop and Al Bloom, when Andy Granatelli was promoting the stock car racing, he also invited motorcycle people to come in and race. So they would have motorcycles and they would have cars. They wouldn't race against each other, but they would run and get paid. And then at Half Day, Illinois, how many people know where Half Day, about 22 and 21, they had a drag strip, Half Day drag strip on an old airfield, and they ran that for about 3 or 4 years. So in the early days of drag racing, and from what I understand, they advertised one time on WLS, and over 2,000 people showed up. They did not have enough food for the spectators, but they made a ton of money. And then also I have a picture here when Andy Granatelli bought Paxton Supercharging, which is also the and that's how he got involved with Studebaker and the Avantis. And now we're going to talk about my favorite subject, and that is going to the Bonneville Salt Flats. So Andy Granatelli put a team together. It was Andy raced the car, his brother Joe, his other brother Vince, all of them got to drive the cars. And they also brought in Paula Murphy and Barbara Niesman. And these two gals had some experience with road racing, some experience with drag racing. And what it came down to, the bottom line at Bonneville as far as the fastest production car was with the R3 engine, the Avanti, with Andy Granatelli driving after a couple of days of testing and that, and they had 3 Avantis there. We finally went 100, two-way average, 170 miles an hour with the Avanti, with the R3 engine. And just previous to that, Mickey Thompson was there. He had the Pontiac Catalina with the 427 with 2 quads. And the best Mickey Thompson could do with the Pontiac was 150 miles an hour. So here's this Studebaker, that it was a lighter car. It was a Class C car, because it only had the small engine, it was 304 cubic inches. And it became the fastest production car. And that record stood, I think, if I'm not mistaken, all the way through the 80s. That a production car finally went faster than 170 miles an hour. Then Andy did go back again with another car that made 500 horsepower, and he went 190 some miles an hour. So that was Andy Granatelli at Bonneville. But I gave you specs there what happened, because when I find out, not only did Studebaker bring the Avantis, they also brought 6-cylinder Larks, they brought the Hawks with the R1s, R2 engines, and they set over, what was the figure? 349 total records. And you have the records and then sheets I gave you. Here's a great example. They ran a 10-mile oval. Imagine a 10-mile oval on the Salt Flats. So they had the R3 with the supercharging in one car, and they had 2 drivers. They had Joe was lined up with Paula, and Vince was lined up with Barbara. And it was the R4 engine that went faster with the average speed 118 miles an hour for 500 kilometers. So it was but I mean, I'm just imagining getting to ride a 10-mile oval to set records. On the 1-mile oval, Paula and Barb together set a record for a 6-cylinder car at, I believe, 100 miles an hour on the 1-mile oval for 50 kilometers. So that's part of how, if you look at the records there, Studebaker made a big effort. The only thing that bad to come about this is there was only 4,000 Avantis or so sold in 1963, and maybe 800 in 1964. And next thing you know, they ran out of money. So all this greatness, 62, 63, 64, all this enthusiasm disappeared. So it's a sad statement, but what can I say? And there's also a good story. Is Steve Blake Racing. I got 2 pictures here. He did race in Avanti at the 24-hour at Daytona, and finished 3rd place in the production prototype class and 29th overall. And he also ran the Avanti at Mid-Ohio also. So this was back in 1983 and 1984. And I got these great looking pictures of a real racing Avanti. And that's the end of my presentation. I appreciate you. And it's going to be a TV show. So if you go to YouTube, and it's on the calendar. If you go to YouTube, put in Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing, the show will be up probably in 3 or 4 weeks. If you're in Chicago, with their public access on Channel 19, Monday nights at 9 o'clock, and Tuesdays at 4 o'clock. All the suburbs where my show used to be on with Comcast on their public access, they ended it on August 11th last year. So there's no more Team Chicago in the suburbs. But I am on in Grand Rapids. I'm on a couple other systems. But YouTube, everything I'm producing now, I will put up on YouTube. So this will be on YouTube.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
The Avanti Association holds their monthly meetings at Mr. Beef on Route 83 in Mount Prospect. For more information on Chicagoland Avanti Owners Association Facebook, go to Avanti.Chicagoland. rschaefer19@yahoo.com is the email if you want more info. Contact me, and I love to hear from my audience. It's teamdan45@gmail.com. And remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing for great motorcycle racing action, Dan Schmitt Politics to learn what makes America great. And I highly encourage you to visit the World of Motorcycle Museum. They're in Winamac, Indiana, 4 miles south of North Judson on Indiana Highway 39. But give them a call first at 574-896-3172. It's a great trip and a great collection of motorcycles. Stop by Rich's Yamaha in Rockport, Illinois, and pick up your Team Chicago history package. Give them a call first at 815-838-8130. Their website is richesyamaha.com. Pick up your package of the Team Chicago history. And to let you know of dates coming up for motorcycle stuff, to learn more about old motorcycles, new motorcycles, there's a few dates of Walnut swap meets, and I'll be putting more dates and more events up at the end of my shows.